Sir Kannan Gopalakrishnan. He was working as a senior architect at Engineering Design Research Centre, L&T Construction, India's largest construction company. He's also worked on projects ranging from institutional buildings to international airports, apartment complexes to aircraft hangars. He's also attended 3 international conferences and 2 national conferences, and has also presented technical papers at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, and the MSRIT, Bangalore. He's also won the national championship at Archaman at the India's largest architecture quiz. Sir Kannan Gopalakrishnan currently runs a design firm, Habitat Design Studio, and he is also a visiting faculty at the renowned architecture schools in Tamil Nadu.
Welcome back to UGC lecture series. This is AR 6502, History of Architecture and Culture 5. We're in Unit 3. We're looking at modern architecture, its development and its institutionalization. If you remember the lecture 19, you would probably remember us looking at Adolphe Loos and his critique on ornamentation, his Romplan concept of moving through spaces. We even saw architect Peter Behrens and his industrial classicism and the rise of corporate identity in architecture. But in lecture 20, we are going to look at another concept called Deutsche Werkbund, which originated in Germany, and we will also be looking at a few more concepts like expressionist architecture and character of expressionist architecture later in this episode. Deutsche Werkbund. Deutsche Werkbund was the German Association of Craftsmen, which was a German association of artists, architects, designers and industrialists. The Werkbund would become a very important event in the future of modern architecture, because it was only after Deutsche Werkbund where the starting point of the Bauhaus school of design emerged. So, because of that, Deutsche Werkbund is a very important point in the history of modern architecture. The main initial purpose of Deutsche Werkbund was to establish a certain relationship between a product manufacturer and the design professional. There has to be the relationship between the product manufacturer and the design professional, because only then the design professional can get the benefit of design into the product, so that the German products, the German companies can have global benchmarking at that particular point of time, because they were competing with products from the American and the UK market. So, their products needs to be cutting edge. So, they established a platform where they can bring design professionals and product manufacturers in the same platform. Unlike the Vienna Secession movement, the Deutsche Werkbund was not an artistic movement at all. It was a completely state sponsored effort just to integrate the arts, traditional crafts with industrial mass production technology, just so that the country, Germany as a country, can get a competitive footing on par with England and the US. It was a state sponsored effort, and it was very less of an artistic movement. It was more of an industrial effort to push Germany forward in the market. The motto of Deutsche Werkbund was Warm Sofakissen zum Stadtbau, which means from sofa cushions to city building. This is the kind of range or the vision that the Werkbund had for itself. The history of Deutsche Werkbund goes on like this. It emerged when the architect Joseph Maria Albrecht left Vienna and came to Darmstadt to form an artists' colony, and he came at the invite of Ernest Louis. Ernest Louis was then the Grand Duke of Hesse. The Werkbund was founded by Albrecht, and the other members were Peter Behrens, Paul Bruno and Richard Remmerschmidt and other people. It was started in 1907 in Munich. At the instigation of Hermann Muthesius, it existed till 1934, and then it was re-established after the World War II in 1950. Muthesius was the author of exhaustive 3-volume The English House of 1905, a survey of practical lessons of the English arts and crafts movement. Muthesius was seen as something of a cultural ambassador or an industrial spy between Germany and England. Back then, England was flourishing in terms of arts and crafts movement, and the industrial revolution had been a huge hit in England, and England was far more superior in terms of technology. So Germany wanted to up the technology front, and that is when the Deutsche Werkbund was started. The organization originally included 12 architects and 12 business firms. The architects include Peter Behrens, Theodor Fischer, Joseph Hoffmann, and others. The other architects who were officially affiliated with the projects were Henry van de Velde, who was very important at this point of time because he was the spearhead of Belgian Art Nouveau architecture. The Werkbund commissioned van de Velde to design a theatre for its 1914 Cologne exhibition. And the exhibition was closed and the buildings dismantled ahead of schedule because the World War I had started in 1914. Eliel Saarinen, who was the father of Eero Saarinen, he was made corresponding member of the Deutsche Werkbund in 1914, and he was invited to participate in the 1914 Cologne exhibition. After the Werkbund's more noted members such as Mies van der Rohe, who served as architectural director of the Werkbund, then it took a different turn itself. In this slide, if you see, the Deutsche Werkbund did not really care about architecture or art in any sense. All they wanted to do was mass produce things, and all they need to do was to design one product which was 200% perfect in every manner, and it can be manufactured in so many number of times, and the same profit can be attained in so many different periods. So all they had to design was one product in a perfect manner. So if you take up a particular knife or a fork or a spoon, all they had to design was only just one or few variants, and then you can take the exact measurements and then reproduce it in industry, mass manufacture so many different times, but it will still look so artisty as if it was a designer created product. Similarly with the lamps, furniture and every other thing, all they just had to do was design one or a few primary products, and they had to mass manufacture everything else. There were two people in Deutsche Werkbund who were like the intellectual leaders of the group. One person was Hermann Mutesier, and the other person was someone whom we have met in the previous lectures. He is Henry van de Velde. Both of these gentlemen were influenced by the English arts and crafts movement headed by William Morris. So both van de Velde and Mutesier expanded William Morris's idea to include into arts arena the machine made goods in production. These people also, they thought that everything has to be done according to function, all the products and all the design has to be based on only function, and that unnecessary ornamentation needs to be eliminated from the product and the building. Van de Velde, if we remember correctly, he was one of the people who was spearheading the earlier movement which had a lot of decoration and ornamentation in his works. But we also studied in the same lecture that during his later years he found a transformation in his career. So after the Werkbund was founded, it clearly got divided into two factions. There was one faction which was championed by the Mutesier. He was someone who was in the idea that you have to use as much as mechanical mass production and design standardization possible inside your production. But on the other hand, there was another group of people headed by van de Velde. They thought that individual artistic expression and the value of an individual artist is also integral in preserving any arts movement. So, but due to obvious reasons, the Werkbund adopted Mutesier's idea because basically it was a state sponsored event and they wanted as much mass production and as much profit as possible from the movement. If the movement is not producing profit, or if the movement is not producing standard goods in par with the global market, then the whole reason behind establishing the Werkbund becomes obsolete. So they adopted the Mutesier's idea in 1914, just before the World War I. Now we will look at another important and very interesting style of art movement and architecture movement in the Europe, which is called Expressionism. Strictly speaking, Expressionism was a modernist movement which started in poetry, art, originated in somewhere in Germany in the beginning of 20th century. Then it moved on to other forms of art also. The picture that you see in the screen is a painting by an artist, Edward Munch. It's called The Scream. Okay, now if you ask me what is Expressionism, if you look at the origin of the term Expressionism itself, there were two theories of that. While the word expressionist was used in the modern sense as early as 1850, its origin is sometimes traced to paintings exhibited in 1901 in Paris by an obscure artist, Julien Auguste Herve, which he called expressionisms. Though an alternative view is that the term was coined by the Czech art historian Antonín Matejek in 1910 as the opposite of impressionism. An expressionist wishes, above all, to express himself. He rejects immediate perception and builds on more complex psychic structures. Impressions and mental images that pass through mental people's soul as through a filter which rids them all of substantial accretions to produce their clear essence, assimilated and condensed into more general forms, into types which he transcribes through simple shorthand formula and symbols. There were a lot of people who were precursors to Expressionism. They were the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who was famous among these, and especially his philosophical novel where Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the later plays of the Swedish dramatist August Strindberg, and there were other players like Walt Whitman, Frank Wedekind, Sigmund Freud, a lot of other people who were philosophers who were the precursors to Expressionism. It remained popular during the entire Weimar Republic period, particularly in Berlin. It started with poetry and painting, and then on it went on to a lot of fields such as literature, theatre, dance, film, music, even architecture. While the very word expressionist was used in the modern sense as early as 1850, it is not something which was coined in the 20th century. It was coined as early as 1850. Its origins sometimes traced also to some of the paintings which got exhibited in Paris by some obscure artists. So, what does an expressionist do? An expressionist, what he does is, he tries to express himself, what he thinks and what he feels and what he emotes. He rejects the immediate perception. Immediate perception means I see something and then I depict it as it is. So, an expressionist rejects the immediate perception of a particular object or a certain scenario, but what he does is he takes the perception, builds on complex psychic structures on his perception, adds his own ideology to it, wants to express what he thinks about that particular projection, and then comes up with a product. To him, impressions are mental images that pass through the minds and soul of the people, like passing through a filter, getting rid of all substantial